My name is Laura Ellingson. I'm a professor at Santa Clara University on the West Coast of the United States in California, and I am so excited to be here and hosting this discussion of the wonderful book. I'm trying to see if I can hold it up correctly. There we go. Transformative Autoethnography for Practitioners. And we have the three authors with us here today for our conversation: Kathy Ann Hernandez, Heewon Chang, and Wendy Bilgen. And they're all here to discuss the book, which I've had a chance to read and really enjoy. So I thought it would be fun to start off the discussion by just asking all three of our authors to discuss the book. And I have some questions for them, but please feel free to add your questions as they come up, members of the audience, into the chat, and I will try to incorporate them. But I'll also, I know we're supposed to go for about 50 minutes. I'll stop after about 30 and just allow everybody else who would like to ask a question to do so. Please feel to raise your hand. But if you feel like it's something that we're already on the topic of, also feel free to put it into the chat and we'll incorporate them from there. So let's just start with to our authors, what moved you to write this book now?
Okay, well, I'll start. And hello, everybody. We're so glad you're here. And what a great opportunity to talk about this book. And so the last thing I wanted to do was write a book when we started to write this book together. I think for all of us collectively, where we were at along the scholar practitioner continuum, this was a way to honor our journey. And we found ourselves, having done the publish or perish almost, coming over here where we wanted to make a contribution that would be beneficial to practitioners. Also, we recognize from our own exploration in autoethnography that there was this need to think about autoethnography in more practical ways, so that it could be accessible to a wider audience. And so I'll let my co-authors chime in.
Well, I'll just add one thing to what you said as far as the practitioner and joining that. So after I finished my own dissertation, which was in autoethnography, I was left with the question, what now? Now what do I do with everything that I gleaned and gathered and how I was changed from my dissertation? It seemed like that there should be a path forward after a work such as a dissertation is done. And so that was partially while Kathy Ann didn't want to write a book, I was like, I would love to write a book. So I was so happy to be invited into the process.
In my case, I had to think about what is the contribution of my life to the world. And I have a lot of limitations, but I also a lot of things that I could offer to the world as everyone else. And so I hope in this audience, you also feel that you have your own very distinctive contribution to make. So when this Myers Press had approached me to write an autoethnography book, and I thought to myself, the market is saturated with a lot of great work, and you have seen already great work by those people who are in attendance in this conference. So I never see my work to be in competition with others, as I value others' work. So as we all think about, what is a niche that I could fill, and then especially in company with this great my co-authors. So that was more of our thought about not necessarily another repetition of autoethnography book, but something that they can offer to a different people, or the people who may be maybe a little bit more intimidated by this autoethnography as a research, and see that how our sort of daily activities of a self-discovery, how they can be transformed into something that is meaningful in their personal lives as well as professional lives. So that is the sort of a direction where we wanted to take. So why this time? Because we were invited to write one. Why with these people? Because these are great people. My co-authors are great to work with. And then here we are. So we are so grateful that we are invited to speak to you, the audience, about our book, which I have never done with my previous books. So this has a very special place in my writer's career.
Great. Great. Can you all elaborate some on how the process was worked out of, because I know a lot of people who think about writing a book, as you said, Heewon, might be intimidated, but how did you come together as the three of you as a team? Heewon had been invited to write a book. You had an idea about being more practice focused. So I think it'd be great for people to understand what's the superpower that you each bring, or what is the perspective or the technical skills or the experience? It could be anything, but what are you each bringing to the project?
So I want to just follow up in terms of how Heewon, what Heewon said. And so it's very interesting because there's some pragmatics involved. As if you've written an article, if you've written a book, Heewon was approached and by Maya's president, she was like, I don't know if I could do this. And then she came to me and I said, I really don't have the capacity to do this either. I have too much to do. Yeah. And then Heewon, and I think this is her superpower. She is a visionary. She's always thinking about how can she move autoethnography forward. She was the one who introduced me to autoethnography. And so she said, well, what if we got somebody else to help? It would make the work, more manageable. And we thought about Wendy. Wendy was a graduate from our program and a great scholar. And so that was part of how it came together. But underneath all of that, based on our collective work, Heewon and I have collaborated on a number of projects. We kept seeing this theme coming up, that in addition to the scholarship that we were producing, there were artifacts that were not being represented in the published work. There were transformative benefits. And so with her visual thinking, and I also think her superpower is Heewon is really good at visualizing, creating charts, graphs, templates. Yeah. And Wendy is digging into the literature queen. And I would say I'm a structured, kind of organized, methodical kind of person. So it was a great synergy to have these strengths to pull together to get this work done. And definitely one of the things we said about the work, now when we look at it, we can separate what is Heewon's part from my part from Wendy's part. It is a collective. It's a socially constructive whole.
Wonderful.
Well, if I may add also to Kathy Ann's talk, by the way, you can see that how generous she is in complimenting her colleagues. Yeah. And this is the, I think, foundation of collaboration. So in some ways that each one of us brings superpower to this process, but also there is a fundamental grounds that we were looking at, especially me. So by the way, I also want you to, the audience, know, actually, Laura had already put this, some thoughts and questions together. This is fantastic. Yeah. So we looked at it, and then this really brings out the best part of this conversation. So I want to compliment you for organizing and putting the questions. And then I think some of the questions are delicious. So I want you to stay around. And then actually that how she's phrasing her questions. And here, so my friend, that if you think about it, is that we each one of us sort of gauge each other too. It is not that it is a random sort of gathering. I have seen Wendy for a while, and Kathy Ann, I've been in career in the same department and working together. But the bottom line for us is that also a bit of a discernment as a colleague and co-author. That's sometimes it's different things. So being able to do a measured risk take, that was important for me. I wasn't going to invite Kathy Ann to work with me nor Wendy. And I have a lot of great people who brings a lot of wonderful powers into the process, but how to measure the risk take to make sure that this goal is going to be accomplished. So that is that. I don't know whether that is something that I can articulate a little bit more, but so that depart from the fact that everyone has a great strength as an author, but there is also that some people has a greater strength as collaborators. And I was going to make a measured risk take when I invite Kathy and Wendy. So that was my luck. And that's a blessing that I could count. And then also that I want to encourage everyone that our strength even came out more throughout the process. Even though I have done the number of other work with Kathy Ann besides another book, it's a collaborative autoethnography, and Wendy, I have seen her writing all that. But the bottom line is that if I or any of them wanted to put everything in place before we take off, I'm sure we are still talking about starting the book. And I'm sure the publisher will wait for us, but I don't know when the book would be finished. So in some ways that the measured risk taking was based upon trust in each other, that with all the strength, we are going to pull things together and we need to run for that, the goal, although the things are not all in place. So if you are writers who feel like, okay, you cannot start until everything is in place, I was like you before, and then now I have moved on and become a little bit more relaxed runner. If you put me in as a running world, is that I'm okay not to have everything. I don't need to carry all the waters, and I don't need to carry all this super food before. And I'm trusting that somebody is going to provide that. And then I'm going to be okay if I have to slow down and walk sometimes. So maybe that my superpower is being gained in the process of doing a lot of collaboration within the last multiple decades of being in the business.
Wonderful. Wendy, did you want to add anything on that one?
Well, I will add, wow, this is, I like what you said, Heewon, that the superpowers sort of came out as we had to use them, maybe. Part of that is the collaborative process. So I did find that we all had the superpower of, the tenacity, I guess, to not go too fast. Like when we were struggling over an idea, we really would talk about it a lot. And so I don't think it's my superpower, but I would bring in a certain perspective that was unique. I have a different professional background. I'm a therapist. I'm a social worker. Heewon and Kathy Ann come from leadership and education and psychology also. But so the superpower that we all had to engage was sticking in there with the dialogue around things that we weren't sure about, and how do we go forward? And much to what you were saying, Heewon, without really knowing, we know we want to bring it to a new place because it naturally goes there, and we see a new space for it. We see that at the end of an autoethnography, there's so much more that can be done with it. As others have talked about today in other sessions, how do you know when you're done? You're never done. You can always take it to new places. So we really talked a lot and discussed a lot, like, what would that look like? What if we want to build a map for people and help them? how do we envision it ourselves, and how do we put that out there for others? Because there's always more to do at the end of every autoethnography. So yeah, that was a shared superpower. We all had that.
It sounds like an amazing collaborative process. Can you say, just for people who might be thinking of writing a longer project, how long would you say it took you from when you really got a good idea of what the book was going to be until you gave it to the publisher?
Oh, I don't actually remember. Actually, we were writing this during COVID. And the funny thing is that we never met in person the whole time. We used Zoom and we used Google Docs, but I would say about a year. Yeah, we would meet every month and have monthly meetings, and then we would set goals. And so, yeah, it's collaborative work. And, you know, I want to say this because I think we might be presenting a very sanitized view of the process right now. It is challenging. It is challenging to have those conversations when you're not clear. And most of the times you're trying to figure it out as you go. We did the model so many times. We revised it and so you have to be willing to work with ambiguity, to value the relationships as well as the product that will come out of it. And when Heewon talked about the measured risk, I think those are some things that we all were attentive to through the process, but it took a long time. It took about a year. Am I correct? Is that, yeah?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also that we made it clear from the very beginning that although that we were not putting every details in place, that what a role of the first author. So that means the other authors were willing to relinquish their ultimate decision, editorial decision, to the first author. And that was a very important thing for me as a second author, and then also as a Kathy and Wendy, and yeah. So it was intentional because we actually structured it together, but it was not all brainstorming per se. It's some of us played a little more active role in framing it. And then, but we all taken on the chapters, with all the draft chapters. And then I have to tell you that you are very established writers and narrativists. I'm a much more of sort of a methodical perfectionist kind of the writer. So early on, I had such a hard time of letting go of my draft. I didn't want anybody to look at my draft. But in this collaboration, we have agreed that each person is going to do the draft of each chapter, which means that but my draft was not in the place. But because I trusted my first author, who has an ultimate editorial power, is going to reshape if it's necessary and cut it, and then making suggestions for better improvement. And so that trusting and giving that power up, that was a very liberating thing for me as an author. So I just wanted to add to that process. Conversation.
Thank you so much. I think it's great for people to hear more about how this work gets done, especially for some of the newer scholars, but really for everybody. We've already been asked a couple of times in the chat about transformative autoethnography. So why don't we go ahead and skip forward to having you explain the model that you came up with of transformative autoethnography, and sort of as you would explain somebody you love, right? I hope you can help us meet your model, right? Not just as the parts, although those are important too, but what is your hope for it as a whole, right? How do you see it working?
Okay, great. I'm going to take on this because I did give some thoughts to that. And then, by the way, Laura, again, I love this question. And then so it forced me to think about Tam as a holistic being. So here, I'm going to introduce my friend Tam to you. So my friend Tam helps each of us bring out our best self. And then I want you to think about this TAM as a combined figure, composite figure of a self-seeker, systems thinker, and community transformer. And in pursuit of us doing three things constantly, but in tandem, or sometimes in reiteration, is that deep contextual self-knowledge. So continuously seeking this deep knowledge about self, but it is not in isolation, or rather in relation to others. So others means familiar others, such as family, friends, and colleagues, but unfamiliar others, such as strangers, as a part of the society or culture groups, but even the oppositional others. So somebody that who I consider that as a totally different than me, and I hate this, so certain kind of things of this kind of others. But they are giving this the person who's doing the TAMs an opportunity to see themselves, because the autoethnography TAM again is a transformative autoethnography, right, model. So that in relation, that's a very important part. And thirdly, but also that TAM will bring out your best self in applying the self-relational knowledge towards positive transformation of their micro, meso, and macro world. So this morning that Carol Rambo was talking about that, right? There's different levels of a society and our organization. But the bottom line is that, so my friend's TAM will help you to bring out your best self as a seeker, system thinker, and as well as a community transformer.
So I love it, Heewon. I mean, she didn't even tell she was going to give Tam a friend name. I would add to that by saying that we created this model sort of like to put training wheels, if you will. Here's what you do first, here's what you do second, here's what you do third, to put training wheels around reflective work that can be life-changing. That's basically what it is. And, you know, I talk to lots of people in different fields, and whenever I mention the word autoethnography, people outside of the academy, it's a very intimidating word. They have not heard it. And then I have to break it down for them, autoethnography. And so it really was a way to demystify, to say, okay, step one, and we have two parts to the model. Here's what you do first. You enter into these activities to gain insight, to discovery. And then based on that, you do a plan of action for going forward. And then after you have done the action, you evaluate it to see, how could I do it better? How could I change it? And in the process of doing all of that, inherently, that process is transformative. So it's training wheels around reflective work that can really be life-changing.
I love the metaphor.
I don't know if Wendy wants to add anything.
Wendy,
No, I don't know. That was good. That's a good description. I mean, basically, when I think about it, I'm not sure I can introduce it as my good friend Tam here. But I do think of autoethnography as my good friend autoethnography. And then the TAM is, and then what else? Kind of. So the TAM is like the friend that takes you by the hand and says, let's do more with that. Let's put this new gleaning into a new autoethnographic study so you can let it keep on speaking, or let's invite some other people into this thing that you found so that the personal transformation that just happened can be exponentially built by either doing another personal individual autoethnographic study or inviting other people to go on a new journey based on the previous, changes that have happened through autoethnography. So it's just sort of like here, come along, let's keep this going. Don't let that energy, that vision, that inspiration, that change that happened to you through this process die out. Let's not
Yeah.
just do it inspirationally. Let's do it methodically, as Heewon.
So,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And I love the training wheels metaphor as trying to say, we want to help practitioners understand, where are we going with this? Having done this reflection, what can you do with that? And we have a couple of requests for a visual. I don't know if any of you, the authors can share. I've got the picture of the model, but you can't really read it from here. Do any of you, would you be able to share the screen showing the figure from chapter 4, figure 4.1, which is the model? I think I should have thought of this before, but I think it would help people to understand what you're talking about, because of course most of them have not had a chance to read the book yet. Do any of you have it?
Yeah, I will look while you're talking.
Okay,
Yep.
So I think that the model that you've presented is obviously intended for practitioners, but we're talking mostly here to academics. And I think this book would also be really, really useful for people who are teaching autoethnography or who are doing autoethnography themselves while working with organizations, right? As a scholar and practitioner, bridging those. So while Heewon's looking for a better picture of the visual that I have, can you talk a little bit about how you think this practitioner-focused approach fits in with teaching and research together, Wendy?
I think I'll just give maybe 2 quick examples of how it has looked in my life. So first, when I finished my dissertation, which was in autoethnography, so as a researcher, I found that I had these wonderful learnings, and they were arranged along kind of 5 main areas of new learnings or new understandings about myself as a leader and my identity from spiritual backgrounds. And then I wanted to do so much more with all of it, but I took one of the learnings, and took that and sort of brought it into a new autoethnographic journey. So that's kind of what the diagram looks like. It's the first stages are what you might think of as the traditional autoethnography, the exploration and the interpretation and the understandings that you have. And then you take one of those and you put it back into the cycle. So it's almost like action research in a way, where you put it back in and it goes through a similar cycle. So I did that after my dissertation, and took one of my findings, which had to do with where spirituality fits in with leadership, and put that into a new question of, well, how does spirituality actually get defined in other areas of my life too? So then I started kind of a new autoethnographic journey, which I'm still in. The product of that is still underway, but I'm looking for the next layer of transformation that happened. So I had that one transformative period in my life, and now I took that and I put it into a new period in more of a systemic way, so it'll keep on moving forward. So that's how I did it with my own research interest. Like, okay, now what else can I understand about spirituality and identity and where strength comes from? But as a teacher, so that was me as a researcher. As a teacher, I've started to so I think in the TAM model, first, there is a need to understand.
Hold on just a second. While Wendy's talking, Heewon, can you put?
I find it.
Oh,
I did find it, but I realized that I am not able to share the screen. So what I am going to do is actually, I'm going to share the link to my Google Drive in the chat, and then you can open it up by yourself. Would that be all right with you, Laura?
I think that would be great. Yeah, it's figure 4.1, just to everyone. When you go to, if you go on that link, it has the 2 phases basically that they've been talking about, the transformative learning cycle, which is prepare, explore, and discover, and then a transformative application cycle with plan, implement and evaluate. And you go back and forth between these really powerful two cycles that they're talking about. I just think, yeah, if they could see the visual of it, it makes it even more compelling. So can you put that link in?
Yeah,
that is good to be able to see it. So,
Mhm.
and in some ways, I mean, people.
Okay, there it is. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, good. Some people might be thinking, well, it sort of follows them like transformative learning. It follows some other kinds of models that have gone before us as far as how transformation works. You know, there's periods of time with deep exploration, then, you know, kind of uncovering new things and letting those new understandings change you, touch you. And then for transformation, you take that into a new environment, right? You say, okay, this new thing gets a new space to live so that the cycle can be almost replicated, but probably with new, because you're in a new setting, you're in a new context, you might use very different mechanisms for mining your data, your story, telling your story. So it's kind of a similar process, but it's going to look really different because it's moved to another context.
Okay.
It's kind of what came next.
Sure. And would it be possible also in a particular organization, if they really went through this whole process, they might implement something, and that's the second phase, right? And then do an assessment and then continue on within their own organization. Right. So the researcher can take it somewhere else.
In some ways, if you're doing it in an organizational context, sometimes it mirrors evaluation strategies. But it's always using the autoethnographic principles of the self and your story and self-reflexivity. And so you don't ever lose that component, even though parts of it might look like transformative learning theory or different kinds of evaluation or Donald Schoen's reflective practitioner. And it has those components of it, but it's always in a very autoethnographic space. So
that's the real beauty and strength to me of this book, right? Is you've connected a lot of disparate ideas specifically to how they can be used with autoethnographic methods. And I think often that doesn't happen. We talk about reflection or we talk about stories, but our authors have put them together in this incredibly powerful way that Kathy Ann called it training wheels, right? And I think that that's a good metaphor when you consider how new these methods are to most people. But it's also really powerful for those of us in the academy to have another way of explaining, right, the value of autoethnography, and another way of helping students to understand what the ways in which what sometimes gets dismissed as not practical can be extremely practical at the same time. I want to ask if you could really quickly talk about individual and collaborative or duo autoethnography before we open it up to questions from our audience.
Sure.
You have both of these are explained in the book for those of you who haven't read it yet.
So may I take this first, Deb, and before my colleagues could chime in. So autoethnography, as you know, you can do individually and collaboratively. Collaborative autoethnography also has to engage the research self and as part of the autoethnographic process. So this TAM, it could be done from the very beginning to the end, all at the individual level. So from this learning cycle as well to the application cycle, it could be done individually. And it can also be done collaboratively from the beginning to the end by having people be together and trying to make the transformation at the collaborative and level and then together. But also that people can split. There's a learning cycle from application cycle, and then can engage individuals and then exploration. And then if this individual exploration has brought out that some collaborative transformation needed, And then the researcher could bring this group of people together, and then the initiating the collaborative application process. And that would be based upon this, the self-knowledge and from the first autoethnographer, but others can now then bring that the change and then data collection together as the collaborative group. And then in the same way, it can be split, it can be changed so that collaboratively that the learning process could take place, but everyone wants to sort of stop there. And then, but there is some autoethnographers, they wanted to take this individual journey to complete the TAM process. So again, there is that freedom of combining individual and collaborative into the cycles or continuously going forward. And then also I want to mention one more thing, is that the TAM can be scaled up and scaled down. So the people who are worried about, oh my gosh, it sounds like it's so involved that I don't have enough time to do much of it, and I only have one semester to use it for teaching. And as I said, that when you scale down and making that goal much more the specific and reasonable and then manageable, then this process of learning and application could be done in a short period. And if it's someone who likes to do a much more of a bigger project, and then certainly they scale up as they want. And so again, and then also that it could be a very small scale, the TAM could be almost like a Lego pieces and broken into smaller pieces, and for the ultimately larger goal of a transformation. So that's also possible too.
Can I just, going on the scaling up and scaling down idea, and how the individual and collaborative can work. But this is by way of example. So this semester I started adding an individual autoethnographic piece to a social work course right at the beginning, where there were some autoethnographic reflections on a concept, implicit bias. So they did those individually, and then as a group, we talked about the learnings. And then as a second group, they did kind of a collaborative TAM piece where they talked together on how their learnings of their implicit biases were showing up in their field placements. And then they were speaking into each other's insights. And so then from those insights, they would take them into their field placement and bring them back the next week. And so it was kind of building on each other, so that it was a very mini TAM. Because we only had one semester, but there was individual work done that led into a collaborative effort that led into the students seeing transformation in their views of themselves, how they were prejudging, where they were coming in with their biases when they didn't even know they had them. And it was very transformative. They said so, and I saw it in them. Yeah. And then the next thing that they could do next semester is bring those learnings into their next field placement, because they will be changing, and that will be up to them, because I don't have the same students, but they could start a whole new cycle if they wanted of the TAM, individually or collaboratively. So it can happen in a very scaled down way, depending on how much time you have. I'm
so glad you mentioned that, because that is another one of the strengths of the book that I noticed as I was reading through it is I could totally see being able to use this in a semester with a group of students, and like you said, doing both individual and collective work, or staying collective or staying individual. But it's very flexible, and it's long enough to have a good explanation of TAM, of this incredibly powerful model, but it's short enough that you could reasonably assign it to read and know that students would have time to read it. I think that it works incredibly well as a teaching tool for students as well as for practitioners, which I'm assuming is also what you had in mind, right? Is to have students to learn it in their classes as well. I think it would work great. Why don't we go ahead and
can I just jump in a little bit more? Because
Yeah.
people were asking for visuals, and we love that. So one of the things we were intentional about is the second part of the book. We walk through some hypothetical scenarios to show you how it could work in an individual context and in a collaborative context. And I know as a teacher, I think those tools really help people to put a face to this, what we're discussing. So I hope that's helpful.
Good.
Absolutely. Having those kinds of examples really helps people to see how this works after it's been explained. Should we go ahead and take audience questions now? If you could raise your virtual hand, that will move you to the front of the queue so that I can tell who has had their hand raised. If there's something that you would like to ask, if that makes you uncomfortable and you just prefer to put things into the chat, I will keep an eye on that as well. But if anybody wants to ask a specific question, go ahead and raise your hand virtually.
Also, that there are some questions that have been raised, and I was scanning through that. So
Yeah.
maybe, do you mind if I take on the Sandra Hopkins question? Sandra,
Go ahead.
hello, Sandra. So you, Sandra, you asked me that what's the difference? I'm wondering how it's different or similar to transformative autoethnography. So what we have been trying in here is that perhaps the latter part of TAM would be more like application action research than the transformative autoethnography that has been written in the field. So I know that critical autoethnography, transformative autoethnography, we're looking at this autoethnography process as a transformative, which is great. We all acknowledge that, and transformation inherently happens in that autoethnographic process. But what the transformative autoethnography model, TAM, is trying to do is that, well, let's acknowledge that the inherent strength of autoethnography, but also that let's acknowledge that this transformation could be also harnessed in a much more intentional way for specific purposes. And that's what the pedagogical purposes and some organizational transformation purposes or individual development purposes. So that's what we wanted to emphasize. So I wonder whether, Sandra, did I answer your question? Okay, great. Thank you.
Great.
And there are other good questions here, and I am just letting it sit as my colleagues to take on as well.
Well, I saw Nelson ask a question and I responded, which part were very difficult to write and challenging and slow down the process. And that was the model. We intuitively knew what we were doing, but trying to present it in a coherent and easily accessible way. It went through many iterations. And as Wendy said, we were gracious to ourselves to take time to allow it to develop and to be patient with each other as we navigated our differences of opinions and views to come up with a model that was workable.
Nelson, did you want to follow up? Are you?
I just add another, I mean, this may be a little off, but let's say I'm writing another ethnography, so I'm sharing my story, and I want this to be something that's applicable in terms of action research. I'm a professor at a university in New York City. So basically, the issue has to do with student retention, right? So I'm talking about my own experience as a person of color and making it through the system, right? And then I'm also writing on several students whose autoethnography I collected. So I collected stories. So I just wonder if you have some ideas like how maybe I could put it together in an organized fashion.
So I don't know if Heewon wanted to take that, but your question reminded me of our earlier book, which is Collaborative Autoethnography. And some of the nuances around working around that. So in some autoethnographic work, there's a lead autoethnographer, and the lead autoethnographer collaborates with others. So there's some decisions you would have to make about how to include students, how to represent their voices, how to handle ethical issues, and so on. And I also think the Handbook of Autoethnography deals with some of that, but it is possible. It's part of a longer conversation, but it is possible. Did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Wow, Nelson, that sounds very interesting. Well, as you know, that you are the author, you can take it in any directions. But as I'm hearing from Kathy Ann, that perhaps there is another chapter to be made. So that you have done your own, you have students have done own. Now, what do you think about putting it all together, creating some collaborative interpretation of it? And that can yet to be another chapter. Just a quick thinking. But it's, again, and then if it's to be TAM, and certainly that the next steps of so that how does the self-knowledge have propelled each one of you or some of you to make changes around your thinking, your context, and then also the systems around you. So it can be taken to that what kind of transformative work that you are doing, your students are doing based upon the self-knowledge that you have gained. So sounds like a very important the topic that you are undertaking, and looking forward to reading your book in the future.
Thank you.
That example really made me think of catalytic validity, Patty Lather's idea that when you do a project like that, right, that it sparks change and it moves the conversation forward in powerful ways. And that's it's another way of assessing the incredible validity of a project. And it sounds like Nelson is already finding that out. That sounds really cool. Other questions that people would like to ask? I, of course, have many more, but I'm trying to share. While we're waiting, oh, go ahead.
I could ask one, but it implicates me as not being part of the first 5 minutes. But first of all, thank you for this session and for being here, and Laura for agreeing to moderate it. This is fascinating. And my book, I just ordered the book, by the way. So I might have missed this in the beginning. The transformation piece, is that transforming like organizational vision or organization? In your model, is it ever about transforming self?
Yes, absolutely. So we focus on individual autoethnography, where it can be a transformative process for yourself. We also talk about collaborative, where it can be done with others. And so Heewon pointed out earlier, I think, and I wanted to add this to Nelson, with each project, you could decide that the end product for you is scholarship, a paper, a presentation. What TAM does is it brings to the forefront that what you really want is to focus on the changes in perceptions, in schema, in thinking. And I'm thinking, even Nelson, as you're doing your work with your students, how has it changed you? How has this critical self-reflection changed the student? And isn't that something potent to recognize and to highlight? And so that is what TAM allows us to do. But definitely, Keith, it can be done individually or collaboratively.
That's lovely. It makes me excited to get that copy. I've been interested for some time in the transformation of subjectivity within autoethnography, but also within ethnography more generally. And so I think this is something that could help me challenge my thinking and take it to the next level, I think, with an actual model. So again, thank you. Fascinating.
Can I just add one more thing? I mean, I forgot to mention this, but this really excites me about this work, especially collaboratively. One of the things we advocate for is to bring people of difference together, because often we come together with who we are. And then in these spaces, to allow, as we listen to each other's stories and experiences, how does that change our perceptions of what we thought about an incident? For instance, the killing of George Floyd, from different perspectives. And how does that transform us when we advocate for dialogue over debate and reflection?
Absolutely. I wanted to add too, to build on what Keith had offered, that another powerful thing about the model is it really helps to link and to bring together the possibilities of both more analytic ways of knowing and thinking and analyzing, and more evocative ways, which in our field spans both of those, right? I mean, it's a really long continuum of art and analysis coming together. And I think this model provides yet another powerful tool for making that happen, for an individual or for a group.
Yet another uniqueness to it, because oftentimes you have one or the other, right?
Right.
Rather than that generative bridge.
Yes. Oh, I love that generative bridge.
I think for me is that we need concepts to articulate our thinking, but we also need to look at our practice and as emerged or merged or converged practice. So I always struggled with this dichotomy between evocative and analytic. I'm grateful for people who have articulated on distinctiveness on that, and I have done that in my previous book as well. But like Max Weber will say, ideal type does not exist in the real world. And then I think that Keith, I am very appreciative of what you said about this generative bridge. Is then in reality, I think we stand on that generative bridge, and especially in this narrative autoethnographic world, because it's never been a fragmented pieces of work. And so that's why I also very appreciative of Laura, your question of that. Can you tell us about TAM? Not as a fragmented, the distinctiveness and wonderful things about the part, but as a whole. So that is a wholeness of as a human being, wholeness as an organization, wholeness as a society, hopefully that we can contribute to this in creating this wholeness. And so that's a very exciting. And then for that reason, I want to comment quickly about what this Faustina said. Faustina, are you still here? Yeah? Okay, and then she asked a question, is a TAM an autoethnographic research design? And the TAM is a systematic methodical process. That's what we are trying to explain. And then obviously it can work as a research design, but fundamentally in research, we sort of haven't expected the final goal, which is the reporting of our research product. And TAM, in TAM, we try to liberate the people who are doing this process as a transformative process. It's okay not to publish, but it is also absolutely okay to document and share and the whole process as a research. So it's, I'm not quite sure whether I should say just merely equal, but if there's a mathematical formula, they say there's more than just a research design, maybe that's how I want to place TAM as just autoethnographic research design. Great,
Wonderful.
Thank you, Faustina, good question.
I want to thank you all for being here, particularly our authors, Wendy, Heewon, and Kathy Ann, and just thank them for this marvelous work and a chance to get to talk about it. I highly, highly recommend the book. And I think it'll be super useful for people. A couple of people have pointed out in the chat that this might be perfect for conflict resolution classes, or classes where you discuss dialogue and conflict management. I think that sounds incredible. I had as well. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for being such an excellent moderator.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. My absolute
Thanks again,
pleasure.
Laura.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.